Oh, look at that. Okay, cool. Yay, thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome. I was like, we've got like this like really big room.
People at home, don't let her fool you. We're teaming. People are waiting outside to get in. There's so many of them.
So, I guess to make sure that like we've got like plenty of time, we're gonna go ahead and get started, and then people will just like, have to like come in and then realize they missed like the best part at the very beginning.
Feel free to shun those people.
This is being recorded and put on YouTube, just so you know.
Yep. Don't shun that.
If you want,
You want to scrub that part?
we'll scrub it, but it is being live streamed.
All right.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
don't want the recording to be up there,
No.
No, it's cool.
On my
I'm
best
kidding.
behavior from now forward.
We mess with each other like that sometimes. So
It is true. I would like it noted for the audience that I'm not the one that said that.
that is the head of Cali that just said that.
Yes.
So,
For those of you partaking in the pool, the one from Jersey isn't the one that broke it.
and not the person who is an employee of the state of Georgia. So, so I'm Pam Brannon. I work here at the Georgia State University College of Law. I am the coordinator of faculty services in the law library, meaning that I handle basically anything that involves working with faculty and faculty scholarship, which is how this kind of like gestated.
I'm Christine George. I'm from NYU, and I'm the Associate Director for Research and Scholarship there. I am not quite as hands-on when it comes to data management and everything, but I am involved in ScholComm. We have a fantastic data services librarian at our institution, who I believe Pam is meeting with next week. They're having a get-together of law librarian data people. So please reach out if you're interested in that. But
To say your name.
oh yeah, to Elisa Lazier. Did I do that? Yes. Okay, good. Sorry. Wanted to make sure I said her name correctly, but she's organizing it. It's fantastic. But anyway, so I'm involved in ScholComm stuff with this, and that's how Pam and I have really bonded.
So bonded over the years.
Trauma bonded. But so and a lot of this was inspired by a paper that Pam is currently working on that I thought was a fantastic thing. And yes, I believe the official term was glommed on. I glommed on to Pam's idea because there are different principles that I work with in my research and everything that tie in. But a lot of this you should read. Actually, the title of your forthcoming
is realizing empirical data transparency in law. So yeah, and it is part of the Mapping Scholarly Communications in Law Libraries Conference that was just held in Buffalo about
2 weeks ago.
And then the papers will be published somewhere at some point when that is worked out by people that are not either one of us, I think, right?
No, I am one of the people.
Oh, you are?
I just have no knowledge for you at this point in time.
Okay.
We did that one conference and then our focus was all Cali all the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's been a lot of Pam Christine time over the past.
Okay, so enough about us.
Yeah.
And let's go on to the actual thing. So this is about basically like data and code transparency in empirical legal scholarship. Empirical legal scholarship, as you are undoubtedly aware, but I'm going to continue to talk about just now, has been like, of course, like growing in volume and scope over the past few decades. But there's been a similar sort of revolution, different sort of revolution away in other disciplines other than law. And just like in so many things, law is not where other places are in that. Meaning that in other places, it has become the norm to publish AKA like make available the underlying data that was reported in the scholarship and the code that was used to analyze that data and collect that data, et cetera. And that's data and code transparency. And what data and code transparency does is it facilitates a few things. First of all, verification of the accuracy of the research. A lot of this in other fields was driven by well-known instances of people being exposed for bad data collection, fraudulent data collection, bad data analysis practices. If you've ever heard the term p-hacking, that's a data analysis practice that essentially like you keep like rerunning and rerunning and rerunning analyses until you get something and then you report that something, but at the same time, like your data is getting warped and everything's getting like more and more messed up. So data and code transparency facilitate verification of the accuracy of the research through two methods. One is replicability. Replicability is the ability of other researchers to reach the same result that the original researcher reached with using the same data. So that's why data transparency and code transparency in the code that's like used in the analysis would facilitate that, because you're providing other researchers with the material that you used to create to come up with your analysis, and then allowing them to also look at the same thing to make sure that you're doing it right. The other thing that it facilitates is verification through reproducibility. And reproducibility is where the processes that you use to collect the data are transparent. And then through transparency of those processes, it allows other people to attempt to collect the same data and reach the same result, or collect similar data and like reach a, understandably similar result, but maybe slightly different. So the other thing that data and code transparency facilitates is, of course, follow-on research. The person who has collected all of this information holds all this information and holds it like on their computer or something like that. And they've expended all of this effort and there's no other like, where that's going to go. And so the kind of like, talk about like libraries create ecosystems of, just so you know, we're being recorded.
Oh, okay. That's good. That's my best behavior.
You have, yeah, you were not the person that said that thing earlier.
That's true.
So,
The building blocks of
Yeah.
libraries.
yeah, so it creates like like libraries create like an ecosystem of knowledge, like we preserve and like make knowledge available. And this is basically doing the exact same thing with the data that is used in these studies. So it makes that data available for use by other researchers. And in law, you can actually like look at like, examples of this. Like we all know about like the Space like Supreme Court like data set, that's been like, a landmark like data set for like decades. SCOTUS blog has like their like Supreme Court stat packs that, get published, every year. And then those can be used by, anybody. This is another like, good that comes out of data and code transparency. So data and code transparency has become the norm in other disciplines. They're like very like there have been like since about like 2010 or so, there have been developed like, sets of like rules that people like follow to achieve data and code transparency. And so, and those can ultimately be like, can be summed up in what are called the FAIR guiding principles. And the FAIR guiding principles were first articulated in a paper, this paper actually, not just any paper, the one that's actually up on the screen, in 2015. And FAIR is, of course, an acronym, as evidenced by the fact that it's in all caps. And the acronym stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And so these are like when you make data and code available, these are the things that that data and code should be. It should be findable. You should be able to actually like find it. You should be able to access it and use it. It should be interoperable. Therefore, you should be able to use it on whatever system you have. We will talk more in more detail about all of these, of course. And then reusable, so it should have like sufficient permissions by which people can reuse it. Also, interoperability come in there at the same time. These all like there's a whole lot of interplay between these. So yeah, but
Not the norm in legal scholarship. We are unique, and not in a good way, in that we just are not following those. And I'm saying like we more generally, because this is not just to, kind of hoist up
it's not a GSU and NYU problem.
no, it's not. It's a
everybody's problem.
universal problem, and it's not just saying that legal scholars are doing this or the law journals are doing this in particular. Even the librarians ourselves are guilty of not necessarily following the FAIR principles when putting together our law repositories, for instance. And this is one of the things where the hope with this is that once you find out, you do better.
Mhm.
So, and that's kind of what this is, an educational opportunity, a learning moment, if you will, because as you can see, people are interested once they do know. So there is a joint law review statement on data. I use in interchangeably, unfortunately, but it
Data,
annoyed me.
data.
So
Yeah.
and code transparency. So this is a statement that many law journals have signed on to. And
It was in 2022.
2022. Yeah, it's a very recent development, but like part of the thing is the words are great. How do you execute this? Like, how do you make sure that it's there? And this is no disrespect to the law journals, but like when you have leadership turning over every year, sometimes continuity is a bit rough.
Mhm.
And sometimes the library doesn't know that the journal signed on to this kind of thing. So like, there's just not enough communication among all of the relevant parties. However, though, Pam does have an example of where.
Yeah, so there's I don't know if anybody's familiar with this. I'm of course familiar with this because I'm here and we are known for our health law program. And so we know about everything that's going on in health law. And also known for their health law program is Temple, and that's where this comes out of. This is Law Atlas, which is a part of the public health law program from Temple, led by Scott Burris. And it's part of this thing called legal epidemiology that he's really been like a champion of and like a driving force for. It's basically collecting data about laws and like how laws change across the US and then like matching those with scientific data about like changes in population or like trends, and then seeing like like what sorts of like changes like legal changes make in like larger like past in like the impact of changes in law. And one of the things that they've done is there's a site called Law Atlas. Anybody can sign up for it. And they host public health law data sets. So people who do legal epidemiology will like collect a data set. The data set like can be put on Law Atlas, not just the data, but the code book, the protocol that's used to collect that data, all of the stuff that you would need for replication put on there. And it's no surprise that the people in health law are the people who are doing this, because those are the people who are the most tied into what's going on in the sciences. And that's where data and code transparency has like really like come from. So of course, they're going to be like kind of the leaders in this in law.
And it's an example of the interoperability because again, you have law and medicine, science, all of that stuff. So, and you might have noticed that Pam and I are also showing our sources throughout this entire presentation because we are trying to practice what we preach.
So what we're going to do at this point is kind of go through like what the research data lifecycle looks like, and then what we can do about it. So basically how we can work to embed research data transparency in like the law through actually fairly easy, like manageable things. And a lot of resources that are already available to us. So this is an example, or this is just like a graphic, a nice, pretty graphic of the research data lifecycle, basically moving from like planning your research to collecting your data, storing your data, analyzing your data, and then making it available. And we're going to go through this in a much more abbreviated fashion, but I did want to show you a nice, pretty graphic. So here, nice, pretty graphic.
Very pretty graphic.
Yeah, lots of colors. So, so the first step of the research data lifecycle is planning your research. Librarians and legal writing people who teach research, we know all about developing research plans. Like we tell students to do that. Do people always do that? No. But this is how we can, once you know better, you do better again. So planning the research, what data and code transparency includes in this stage of the process is developing a research question before you collect the data, not just collecting data and then like figuring it out as you go along. Designing a research protocol by which you collect the data, that you use to collect the data in a structured manner. Registering and pre-registering the protocol. And what registering and pre-registering the protocol means is basically like creating a document, an untouched, like basically like it is stamped in time, like document that then is like locked and becomes read-only, that basically memorializes that as of this date, before you started collecting the data, messing with the data, analyzing anything, you've developed your protocol. And that's a guard against, you know, messing with your protocol later on once you started looking at the data and you've decided, oh, wait, this doesn't quite say what I wanted to say. How can I mess with this? Because again, replication crisis, like p-hacking, these are things that this is like designed to guard against. So registering or pre-registering your protocol, and then developing a data management plan. And this is something that in other disciplines has really been driven by grant funding. Grant funding in other disciplines, a lot of funders require data management plans from the researchers. And a data management plan is basically, here's how we're going to collect the data. If the data includes personally identifiable information or other sensitive information, here's how we're going to provide for the privacy of that information. And then here's how we're going to provide for the permanent storage and sharing of that data. And as we go through and work with that data, here's how we're going to make sure that we keep track of everything in a structured way. Again, all good things to do at the front end, when we talk about developing research plans. This is kind of like what we, ask our students to do. So, and the great thing is, again, there are models out there because as I said, other disciplines have been doing this for a while. And so this is, while it's not great to be the discipline that everybody thinks is the one that is the Wild West for, say like research. People just do anything they want over there in law. What is good is that there have been norms that have been developed in other fields, and we don't have to develop those then. We can just use what they've already developed. So OSF, which is a part of the Center for Open Science, has a registration site where people can set up a portal to register protocols. But then they also just make publicly available templates of registrations. So you don't have to set up an OSF portal and pay the money to do that and do all of that. You can just use the template and save it as of a certain date and lock it and password protect it, lock it, and don't touch it after that. And at that point, you've registered your protocol, essentially. OSF registration is essentially pushing that onto a third party and like verifying with the third party that you've done that. But they have templates of these these like research protocols. Same thing with like DMP tool. DMP tool is the like most prevalent or the most used tool for creating data management plans. And the great thing about DMP tool is it's available for free to like any like nonprofit institution. And if you work at a school that, and this is kind of a thing that we're going to like turn back to over and over again. If you work at an institution that is not a standalone law school, like you work at an institution that is affiliated with a university, which is like the vast majority of us, I'm willing to bet you already have access to these things. If you go and look at like your university libraries, like, resources, they probably somewhere link to DMP tool. They probably somewhere like talk about a lot of these resources. Because again, this has become such the norm in like scientific fields. So,
Which we're hoping translates easier to law, because law, particularly transactional law, loves a template. So, this is one of those things where the same way that you would go to like forms or any of that stuff, it's like, oh, guidance, please hold my hand. Tell me exactly what I need to fill in where for these Mad Libs kind of a thing. So there already is some kind of like framework, people accept this sort of a thing, and then finding out like, oh, this exists elsewhere. So like, it's not going to be that big of a leap. I'm choosing to believe. This is me, the optimist. I'm always playing that role.
well, no, I mean, I think that's very true. Like I have heard from people who have started, who have like, applied for grants, and then as a part of applying for the grant, they've needed to submit a data management plan. They're like, oh, well, we got a sample data management plan from these people in this other like, department. And so then we just like use that to modify, which is exactly why DMP tool puts like these like public plans out there as like exemplars to go by. It's, actually like a lot of, or at least I've heard the like legal documents that lawyers use refer to as go bys. So, yeah.
It's all part of the building block
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's what is included at like the front end of it. As far as like what can be done in law, we've already talked a little bit about that, but
So this is one of the tricky things where, so ideally you would like to institute checks throughout the writing and submission process. So, kind of finding out if somebody is doing research in a particular area where they are using data, and then, kind of just being like, checking in. Are you using, like, are you aware of our institution's access to DMP or any of these other things? But this is tricky, right? Because this really depends on the culture at your institution, and also the relationship you have with the faculty or law journals or whoever, or honestly, if you are doing your research yourself, can take a little bit of a firmer tone with yourself than you can with some of your faculty. But so it's kind of checking in with the situation, seeing, what's available. Maybe there are sessions where people are discussing their research and you're able to kind of interject into that. And like, again, the other thing is, and as librarians know, it's not being like, I am the expert in this area, I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. It's gently nudging forward and,
like,
kind of
hey,
just raising awareness about different tools. Because again, this is one of those things where the information exists. It just really hasn't permeated into law because we are somewhat siloed, because a lot of our different library services and everything are more attuned to just the legal institution than the university as a whole.
yeah, and another way that this can be done is talk about like the writing process, but also the submission process too. So like this is an example of this is from the information about Northwestern University Law Reviews. They have a dedicated empirical issue of their journal each year, and as part of their dedicated empirical issue, see here, it says like authors submitting empirical pieces are required to submit data sets and or submit supporting materials with their articles in order to allow for complete consideration of their work. So this is where like, they as a journal say, okay, before we even decide whether or not we're going to accept your work, you need to submit to us everything that you relied upon. Now, there can also be like, just like making it all available too at the back end, but this is a part of it.
And because you don't want, as a journal, to be wasting the resources in starting to go through the publication process with an article that you find out has unreliable, or can we say dirty data? Is that bad?
Yeah, you can say dirty
We
data,
don't want that.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
this is one of those things, instituting that check initially and setting that expectation to the authors who are submitting helps kind of gently nudge people into accepting this process, because there's no easier way to get authors to sign on to something than by making it a requirement for submission.
Yeah, and the other thing too that the journals can do, because we all know journals are staffed with second and third year law students, and they, as Christine said, turnover. There's no guarantee that the people who are on the managing board or editorial board of the journal each year necessarily have the expertise to evaluate all of this. But this is where, like faculty and librarians can like step in, because, the chances are that at least one person on your faculty has some sort of data like knowledge, like somebody has a PhD in a field that has required like some sort of background in data science. This is also something where the law faculty across the country can develop a community of people, like people who are experts in data analysis and can be volunteer, dare I say, peer reviewers for
Perish the thought, we don't do that.
for empirical work. One of the things that law is criticized for repeatedly from other fields is we don't have peer review. We don't have anybody who is like really checking our work. And it's one thing for like a student who is like working with a doctrinal like piece that like, just like analyzes the law. The students kind of like know something about the law. But when you talk about like data, that's a whole nother ballgame that they're not trained in. Like by and large, we can't trust that they've been trained in that. So develop a system to allow for that.
And then be
sorry.
shocked how following one best practice leads to following another best practice. And all of a sudden, we're following all of the acceptable best practices.
Imagine. Yeah. So instituting checks then.
Yes, the positive peer pressure. So like that's the one trying to, again, nudge different people into this. I like to use positive peer pressure sometimes with working with journals in saying, oh, well, so-and-so has started talking about adopting like DOIs and that kind of a thing. Is that something like you might be interested in? And then all of a sudden they're like, wait, somebody else is doing that? Okay, like I'm going to do that too. So like, don't believe that all peer pressure is bad. Sometimes it's really good to try to force a positive wave, but like, use your powers for good and not evil with that. But, again, this is part of like the gentle nudging, because that's how this is going to be accepted.
It's almost like that's kind of what we're doing in a way with this presentation too, right?
We're going to that over here.
So, and then, just let people know about what's available.
Because they do exist. Like, that's the thing. Like, once you start looking for it, I mean, Pam did say she was open to the challenge of somebody saying their institution, so long as it is not just independent law school. If you're associated with a major university, odds are there is something that exists out there, guidance, support, like, I mean, dedicated offices too for that, because grant writing is no joke for anybody who has had to do it. And like, you need to make sure that you have all of your documentation, everything. So it's in the best interest of the institutions to have all of this laid out and easily accessible.
Yeah. So that's planning phase. The next phase is collecting, processing, and analyzing. And this is where you can definitely see I have collapsed several phases together in one. But these phases all like have like similar sorts of things that are required for data and code transparency. The first, of course, being version control. Version control, keeping track of every single change that you've made. Consistent naming practices for your data and your file so you actually know what you're looking at. Preserving your code. If you use code to collect the data, if whatever code you've used to analyze the data. Compliance with any privacy requirements, including IRBs. And then documenting each step of the way. So I just realized I'm going to skip ahead real quick because, yeah.
We've been full of spoilers today, so.
So this is kind of an example of like, hey, so literally it just takes like looking to see what's at your institution now that you know. That's like what I did once I knew. And I found like this. So there's a piece of software called RedCap that comes from Vanderbilt University. It was developed for use in clinical studies and biomedical research. And it's available to like universities, and a lot of universities have access to it. So like Georgia State here, like we have this wonderful site that talks about like, okay, you want to do research and you want to gather data. We have like these two data gathering options, RedCap and Qualtrics. And then this is a really nice like little like checklist of the different features of the two and what you might want and why you might want to choose one or the other. Again, example of like literally just went like, oh, NYU. Hey, look at that. You have RedCap too.
Did I know before this presentation that we did? No, I did not, but I'm sure our data person did.
You know, like again, examples like this infrastructure already exists. All we have to do is adopt it. Same way with version control, like the infrastructure for version control exists. Everybody has like seen, like it has had that example of like, you know, like, no, this, like they named the file, this is the final file. No, this is the final file. Like, no. I have a file that's like literally called updated, use this one, I think.
In all caps, swear to God, this is the last one.
Yeah. And so, so version control not only preserves each single, like, you know, copy of like your data or your, you know, process, but it also ensures that you are not going to be the person who is editing the wrong file. Because you can't remember your naming convention. And this is where something like Git and GitHub really come in. GitHub and Git really is a version control system that is free, open source, really lightweight. And yes, I will say there is a learning curve for it. Absolutely. But once you learn that curve, or once you once you get to the top of that curve, I think is the thing, right? Once you get there, you can then, you know, get basically like you can commit, like in each commit, you like save your changes and you create a snapshot of your work at that point in time, and you create a log of what the changes are at that point in time. And so that is keeping it, you know, that is keeping all of your versions. Same way, if you want to, one of the things that you can do with Git is you can actually like branch. So like, let's say that you have like your like main research and then like partway through, you're like, oh, hey, what happens if I try this thing? You can branch off and try that thing and leave your main research like untouched. And that's, you know, this programmers, of course, like are super familiar with this because this is exactly what they do. Like, you know, like you want to test out like a little change to the code, you branch it off and do it there so you don't mess with the like with the main version.
Sliding doors moment, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that's actually again freeware, easy to use, is OpenRefine. Librarians may have heard of OpenRefine. Catalog librarians have been talking about this for a bit because it's a thing that can be used to really clean up like messy data. Well, that's a lot of what it's used for, is cleaning up like messy data. Like you've got like a bunch of business registrations where somebody, say, spells corporation co and corp and corporation and
Throws an extra P in there.
yeah, all sorts of things. OpenRefine makes it really easy to gather all of those things together, all of those instances, and then change them at once to clean up all of your data. Again, this is freeware. It is freely available. It is open source. Another beautiful thing, it runs locally on your machine. Git also can just run locally on your machine. And so you don't actually have to put it up anywhere. So if you have like privacy concerns or something like that, then you can like really kind of cabin where the data lives and where it goes. So again, things that are, already available. And there are like, tons of resources available on like how to use these. So,
Also, it's one of those things where people are kind of understanding when
Mm.
you're like first branching into them too, which is kind of nice because it's always awkward when you're like, I know nothing. Well, I mean, I'm comfortable with saying that because like tech coding thing, I know nothing about this and I'm willing to like go forward with it. And people are eager to explain because it's best for everybody that there's universal usage
mhm.
of this. So what can be done in law? You kind of talked about this. So like your outreach, like just making this knowledge available because, and again, not to Pollyanna the situation, but like if people know this exists, they're more likely to use it because again, it's for a greater good. And fair compliance too is not like, it's the guiding principles. Nobody is standing there with a hammer being like, you must follow this or like, everything ends. So, and then relying on university IRB sources, like, I mean, this is the tricky thing because I think this comes up a lot in law. You're like, do I have to use an IRB? Yes.
You went through all of this.
Yes. My sincere apologies to the NYU IRB department, who I promise I'll never
My
do
apology
another
too,
again.
because I was somebody who said, "Hey, you have to do IRB, right?"
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was the one, and that's when
Sorry.
we went off the cliff. But anyway, but no, but like even you need to go through IRB just to find out you don't need to go, like you don't need to have an IRB, you still need that documentation. So, and again, university resources, incredibly helpful and people want to be able to help this.
Mhm.
Git, I guess. I'm sorry, I was sitting on that the entire time and I was like, I just want to say it.
You
And
said
then
it, not me.
yes, I know. I went for it. I couldn't help myself. And then the other thing too, in this, we're talking about librarians, we're talking about university resources. Be friends with the IT department. They are super, super helpful. They also know the things that exist that might not even be necessarily like on the websites and everything.
What I was
It's just-
literally just
Yes.
like literally just happened before this presentation, like our IT came in and I was like, "Oh, hey, so our SQL server that was set up," and all like, "Let's talk about that." Because friends with IT and they know how to do things.
Mhm. No, like trust their knowledge. They definitely can help. And it's important to remember too, like many things, you have law IT and then you have university IT too. And so communication, like a lot of this is just communicating, finding out what's out there and accepting the fact too. Cause I think in law, a lot of the times we like to be like, you know what, we are finding a new path, we're forging a new way. And like, yeah, sure, you can like cut through the forest and all of that stuff, or you could look to the left and be like, wow, somebody already paved a road with signs. Cool, let me follow that. So
Mhm.
that's the kind of thing here that you want to make sure that you're doing.
Mhm. And then the last phase, collect, of course, all kind of thrown together, preservation and sharing. So data and co-transparency includes making the information available, something that librarians know something about, making sure that there's robust metadata. Again, something that librarians know something about. Again, metadata also goes into the findability as well. Like metadata makes things findable. Citability, making sure that couple of things. First, that there's an easy way to cite the data, and then there's an increased norm for citing the data that you're using, and then saving it in open formats. That's that interoperability again. And transparent licensing, because it's all well and good if you find like data on the web, but then you're like, oh, can I use this? I don't know if I can use this. How can I use this? So making sure that everybody can see like, oh yeah, this is a thing that I can do and I can use. So what we can do.
So again, check with your institution. You may already have a data repository. And even though we're saying data repository, a lot of the times any repository will work too. Because, oh yeah, see, skipping ahead, spoilers all over the place. But you may not have a specific one for that, but
What's NYU's called?
Ultraviolet, very well named.
So cool.
We appreciate that.
So cool.
But so like talk to people. Resources exist. And also the people who are in charge of these resources are also pretty good at figuring out like, okay, we don't have exactly what you need, but let's do something else. Because again, trying to follow the guiding principles. So the spirit of it.
Yeah, so here's an example of this is literally just a digital commons site, which is the most prevalent type of repository. And this is Chapman University just putting up in digital commons the data, the access database, ArcGIS maps, Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, etc. Like just putting all of that up because again, you can it doesn't just have to be a PDF in digital commons. You can save all sorts of file types in digital commons. Does your law review have a digital commons site? If your law review has a digital commons site, then you've got, say, maybe the paper that includes that is an empirical paper, and just add in the data.
And you can add multiple files to it, different file types. I mean, I don't know why you'd want to do this, but like if you wanted interpretive dance as your data management plan, you can upload a video of that. So, I mean, it's one of those
Don't
things like,
knock interpretive dance.
I mean, I would love to see it.
I have a friend who has a dance
I'm not knocking it.
degree, and
Westlaw.
I'm just standing up
for that when we lost internet at one institution. So it's one of those things where there are a lot of possibilities with this. So just ask.
Again, here, talk about this is like the lower part of that same thing here. So we've got the recommended citation here, the recommended citation that includes the DOI. So that makes it incredibly easy to cite to and have a permanent like link to this data set. And then at the very bottom, you see this like beautiful Creative Commons license there. So makes it incredibly easy to see what you can do and how you can use that data. As I said, like if you don't have a repository, you don't want to add stuff to your repository, or let's say you want to choose like a I keep saying boots and suspenders, it's belt and suspenders, but I always want to say boots and suspenders. But if you want to choose the belt and suspenders approach, put your data in multiple places. Put it in your own repository and put it in the Harvard Dataverse, which is available for anybody to use. Again, all of this like information, and the Harvard Dataverse will actually like assign a DOI for your data and once you put it up in there. So, and this is again, same sort of thing, like license and data use agreement here. Makes it incredibly easy to use.
I mean, think about how you would want it put forward. What would make it easiest for you as a researcher in order to use this thing? And then do that. If you kind of have that mentality, it only gets better.
I was going to say, because I think Jason Rantanen is at Virginia, which has its own Dataverse, and this is in the Harvard Dataverse. So it's probably in both places, actually. I didn't check. But then also we've talked a little bit about like the Creative Commons licenses, like, right statements and Creative Commons licenses. Incredibly easy. Creative Commons will literally walk you through the steps to choose which of the Creative Commons licenses works for you. And then there's a resource that I just learned about actually really recently due to a colleague of ours at Michigan, Sarah Walashuk. So shout out, Sarah. And rights statements. And this, if you've ever seen a repository, I think that Library of Congress actually uses this, that has like one of these like buttons on it. This is where they come from. And so these are like easy to like see and pretty easy to interpret, like buttons that can be incorporated in a repository that just, say like, okay, so this can be used, this has no copyright, it could be used for non-commercial use, or this has no copyright and but does have contractual restrictions.
Transparency can be fun.
Yeah, except I'm now confused as somebody who studied copyright, but I'm not going to deal with that right now.
That's a different presentation.
That's a different presentation. But yeah, so again, point being, like, this infrastructure exists. It's just a question of, like being aware of it and then making other people aware of it and starting to use it. So
Yeah, be transparent, kind of try to be better now that you're aware of it.
mhm,
Spread the word.
mhm.
And I guess we're open to questions.
Yeah,
And
if there are any, if we haven't like, completely like stunned everybody. Yes, Mr. Mayor.
6 minutes to the presentation. I didn't hear SSRN mentioned once. Good and evil. Repository of the lazy law professors. I'll put it there, and that's my sharing of my stuff. Any? Did I
So SSRN is not designed for data sets. So
the trickier sometimes, and they go back and forth too. Like there was a point in time when they didn't even want amicus briefs up there, even though those are like Word documents and all of that stuff. So it requires a bit more checking with it. I mean, the theory of what you're saying is good. Like, if you want to have it up there, you want to have it available, you don't have an institutional repository.
yeah, I would say if you want, you can definitely like make the papers available on SSRN, but and in the papers you would cite to the data, and the data could then be deposited. There's like Mendeley data, which is also owned by Elsevier, which is the company that owns SSRN. And so there is that. I personally prefer, as a librarian, I prefer to deposit information in services that are not run by companies and are run by universities or nonprofits. So just like from a preservation standpoint, and as somebody who studied copyright and wrote her note on the orphan works problem, I'm very aware of the of companies going under and then the information becoming unusable or going away. So yeah, so I want to kind of like steer away from that a bit.
But again, this is one of the things where it's helpful to consult people at your institution, be it a librarian, it's somebody else who's depositing these things, or checking with your SSRN administrator, like whoever is administering your SSRN account at your institution, to find out what is possible.
Yeah, and I'm not discounting that, like you could use Mendeley data to deposit your data, but I would not rely solely on that. That's again where that like boots and belt and suspenders, which actually do different things once I include boots. But all those approaches, like basically putting was it lots of copies keep stuff safe? Yeah, putting your information in more putting the information in more places makes it more findable and makes it more less susceptible to being deleted.
But also making sure it's the same version that's put
Yes.
in all the different places, because also that affects your SEO.
Then I will be in the top 10 list next week.
A lot. Gotta make that
Darn.
big fun in the title.
Darn. So, anything else? Yes.
So right now, a lot of the review articles on bringing in like comments and stuff like that, which I assume probably should go through IRB,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing largely do not currently. Law reviews, is that?
It's so I don't, so this is where I think that there may be some degree of people are going through IRB, but then that IRB process may not be checked by the law review. And so it might be something where like, we again do education with the law reviews that like, like, hey, if you are looking at accepting an article that relies upon like student comments and student information, ask the author if they've gone through the IRB process, because as far as I'm aware, there's nothing in the submission process on Scholastica where you would need to disclose that.
Or provide the information, and also anything involving student, like I just knee jerk, I'm like FERPA, check with council.
Yeah.
Like, not even IRB, I was like, I would go to council first to find out if you can even play
Yeah.
around with that.
Yeah, so it's really hard to say like, like is stuff going through IRB because because like unless you go through and like ask each author, like the journal isn't checking that information. And then the journal, because they're not checking that information, they're not including that information in like say a footnote in the journal or anything like that. So
That's be true even for like peer-reviewed law journals like the AB's journal.
yeah.
I'm looking at this one that takes it said it's got a faculty survey, it's got student evaluations that are published in Geometrics.
Mhm.
I always get the journal. Empirical legal.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. I mean, I will say like a lot of empirical legal research that involves like let's say like looking at, like for instance, like the stuff that that legal epidemiology does, where it's just like studying like using publicly available data sets and where you're not collecting the data, and the data that you are collecting is just data on the when laws were passed and when laws changed. As far, according to my understanding, that is not something that is subject to IRB because that's not, interacting with humans and getting the information from humans. Now, that's not what you're looking at, of course. So, IRB is not necessarily a thing that has to be done for everything, but yeah, you're right. I mean, that's definitely a thing that should be included in the process. And sometimes this is really, really easy to do. A friend of ours, Cassie Dubé, shout out to Cassie, literally asked Scholastica if they could include ORCID, asking for the ORCID number for a researcher in the submission stuff, and they did it. Like it's, that was literally just Cassie asking. So, just asking, for creating something on the form where just like, does this include research with humans? If so, describe your IRB process, something like that. Like that's like a like radio button and a like open box. That's so easy.
And I mean, this is an instance too of where it helps to incorporate librarians or other experts in this area, like into the publication process, because Scholastica had no reason to necessarily note why like ORCID IDs are important. And it's the same thing too. Like we did a presentation at AALL last year talking about this, is that a lot of the times librarians in particular, like dealing with repositories and trying to get all the metadata and everything, like following best practices with that, like by the time the articles come to us, they are PDFs, they are done. There is like nothing more like, so trying to retroactively be like, okay, let's get some DOIs in here. How about an ORCID ID? Like, you know, different things like that. So, and at that point, it's already published and you're like, so IRB documentation, other documentation, like it's kind of, the train has left the station. So
I just realized, did I use Cassie's maiden name instead of her married name? Walker, Cassie
Cassie
Walker.
Walker.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Cassie. I went back to this real quick because the Northwestern Law Review, so for their empirical issue, they do have the policy that if it involves data from human subjects, they
Mhm.
must submit the IRB approval or exception or exemption. So like, again, there is something out there that is a model that people can go through. And I'm sure that if people wanted to talk to the Northwestern students about like, you know, the process for this, they would be happy to talk about it. So I remember like I talked to a Northwestern law review student a couple of years ago when I attended the conference on empirical legal studies, and super, super helpful and super forthcoming with stuff. So yeah.
Are there any law schools that enforce this? Seems a little ad hoc to go journal by journal to try to get them to do the enforcement mechanism. Or do the faculty object to having to go through IRB or some of these other things? I'm not quite sure why this isn't just like professor part of your job, that you would go through this before you publish, because whether you're open to litigation potentially or some, maybe there's but you know, if there's some reason this isn't just on law school basis, and that's well,
Should be. It should absolutely be enforced on a law school basis. Um, and you know, part of this is just there need to be some like, you know, checks at law schools. This is one of those things where like, you know, people haven't had the knowledge for so long. You know, I will completely admit before I came to school to work here, um, I knew that there was a human subjects office at the University of Georgia where I went. I did not know what they did because I did not have any. I have an English and philosophy degree in undergrad, and then a library degree and a law degree. None of those required anything with that. When I got here, however, the head of our health law program, Leslie Wolf, studies institutional review boards. And so I was like, oh, hey, IRBs are a thing and they're important. And so a lot of this comes from ignorance in the law schools. And that's part of what we're trying to fight against. But I mean, at some point, there should be a check in the law schools. Now, the question is, who? And at what point in the process, you know, because like before a law professor submits an article for publication, there's no, you know, I am not aware of any sort of like point at which that has to go through a review by administration. And I can absolutely see a lot of complaining if that were the case.
the article's
I
done,
would
and then having to
complain.
go back to try to institute the protocols and everything, like you can't, like it's kind of, and you don't want to see it as wasted work. Part of the other challenge too is institutionally within law schools, sometimes you would have a person, a dedicated journal person who was the
Mhm.
institutional memory, whether that person was in the library or not, who was able to kind of like try to set best practices forward. And it was more
Shout
standard,
out to Gracie at UGA. You were awesome.
but it was.
You're
it was
still awesome.
common before you had all of these digital questions and making things available with that. And so trying to find it now, like, I mean, unfortunately, it's one of those things, like, unless there is a horrific example and everybody will
Mhm.
immediately snap to it, it's very, very slow going
Mhm.
with trying to get that. But yes,
Like put up just like a list of law schools that have this and don't, maybe none of them do, maybe that's bad. A list that have schools and don't have the rules, and then you can publish that, and once they see other people doing it.
Oh, look at that. That's that positive peer pressure, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great idea. That's really cool. And actually that could go along with the stuff that,
oh, the author agreement.
yeah,
thing.
which is Maya, right? Is working on it, or is-
Avi is working on that and somebody else. Who's the other one? I know.
Yeah, Avi Bauer at Boston College. Yeah, Avi Bauer at Boston College is currently working with some people on he's working with some people on a thing that will track the publication licensing information for different like journals. And this is honestly something that could potentially be included in that.
Yeah, I'm
as
getting
well.
information with that. It's helpful. So
Yeah,
we're ending on a positive note. Yay.
yeah.
Kind of. Well,
And again, this is kind of like a conversation starter, and like welcome to take like ideas of like what else we can do too, like we just did. So that's really cool. Yeah, we should talk to Avi about that.
yeah, we should definitely.
Okay, cool.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Awesome, great, thank you. Can I just leave?